Hey guys, this is Fady from Harvey Productions and welcome to another video. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking about some of the upgrades I've done in the studio, and specifically is this interface, which is the Galaxy 64 by Antelope Audio. So you guys have seen some of my videos about the Antelope interfaces. I think I started was in Orion, Gen 3, upgraded to Gen 4, then I upgraded to Galaxy 32, and then I just recently redid my entire studio and I routed to the Galaxy 64. So I'm going to be going through specs, features, why I've done what I've done, what's the advantage of the Galaxy 64, and why would somebody consider that in their studio. So before I go into the Galaxy, so you guys understand, my setup in my studio is pretty complex in terms of I have a lot of IOs happening. I have over here, I have a lot of analog pre's, I have a bunch of EQs and compressor over there, and then back behind me where my desk is, I have a lot of other EQ, compression, and just a lot of analog processing stuff. I don't only do mixing and mastering, I also engineer and do a lot of tracking. So in the other room over there, I have a live room with 32 channels of audio, analog audio, plus another 16 channels of digital audio for in-ears and stuff like that. And so I needed something to basically, and this is what I'm trying to say, I need something to accommodate me as a mixing engineer, as a mastering engineer, as well as a tracking and recording engineer. And this thing blew my mind away. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen one interface has that much connectivity and so many IOs all in one 2-unit rack ever before. Not only this, converters are the same converters are in the Galaxy, the 32, which are absolutely phenomenal converters. I've been using these now for the last maybe close to a year now, where I've been using the newer analog converters, and they've transformed my mixes, especially because I'm using a lot of conversion because I'm running through analog summing unit right here, 16 channels of summing, and I do a lot of hardware inserts for my mix because I mix in hybrid and I master fully in analog, and then converters matter to me a lot, and this has been mind-blowing. So let's start with first, I want to talk about some of the IOs, features of this unit, also some of the differences between this one and the Galaxy 32, and why did I upgrade to this one. So as you guys will see in some of the video footage, so the front of that unit, it's become a 2-rack unit instead of one, and then they have a big screen in the middle that is a touch screen, and then there's a power button, but they also added a headphone, which I so grateful for this because the other one did not have headphone. They did take, though, the knob away, which is the one that controls the volume, but you can control the volume from inside the touch screen or from your computer as well. So front panel looks very sleek, simple, not a lot of fancy stuff. That screen, I like how big it is, so I can see up to 32 channels of inputs or outputs. I can just choose what I'm seeing on that screen. So I can change it from inside the screen in here, but I can also change it from my control panel, as well as inside that screen. I can access a lot of the menu. I can access the sample rate. I can access presets to load presets or save presets. I can access my surround or monitors or dim levels or line inputs or outputs. It's really cool because it gives you a quick preview of what you're looking for. And sometimes you have stuff plugged in and you look in here and you see you don't even have to be looking at your computer for this. So that's kind of the front. It's super simple. They added a really not good quality headphone amp or headphone pre out there. Now the back is where the money is. So let's kind of take a look at the back here real quick. There is so much happening. And again, like I said earlier, I don't think I've seen something with that many IOs in one double rack unit before. So first, you get your analog inputs and outputs, which is one of the main reasons why I upgraded to the 64. Because the 32 was 32 in, 32 out via DB25s. This one is 64 in and 64 out, which is amazing. Like that is only the analog. So having that feature, now it gave me, I'm using, just for my pre's, I'm already using about 32 channels. And then I'm using 16 channels for my summing as line outputs. But I'm also using another 8 channels that are going to my patch bay. Now, upgrading to this, it freed my setup a little bit, was more IOs. I have like 2 DB25s now, which is 16 channels of input and output dedicated for hardware inserts, which I'm plugging some of my dedicated units that I'm going to use in mixing and throw it in my session, so they will go directly in that unit. And because this has so many IOs. Also, I used to connect to my Behringer P16 for in-ear mixes for the live room out there. I used to go ADAT to this unit and convert inside the Behringer, which is not the greatest quality. But now that I have more IOs on this, instead I switched my setup and I went analog out from this into my Behringer P16. 2 DB25s, each carries 8 channels of audio, so I'm sending 16 channels to the Behringer, and that feeds the personal units in my live room, and I can drag and drop from the control panel what am I sending in those 16 for custom mixes and stuff like that. So that's one of the first things that I absolutely love about this is the 64 channels of IOs. Now, I still have the monitor outputs left and right, which is a higher dynamic range one, and which is the Galaxy 32 had that one as well. And then it's Thunderbolt 3, similar, but the difference is they added 2 ports now instead of 1 port. The Galaxy 32 only had 1 port, this one had dual. Just comes handy if you want to daisy chain this along your unit or connect a second thing to it, like a hard drive or a monitor or screen or any Thunderbolt device. I kind of like that. Now, they also have SPDIF input and output, same as the unit before. They have 64 channels of Dante at 48 sample rate, similar to before, which I use that in my setup. And the way that I use it is I have my Grace M908. It's receiving Dante, and this unit is sending Dante. So this sends, I send 16 channels from here to the Dante network as outputs, and then they go to my Grace. And how I work with it is I have mix 1 and 2 going through the first 2 channels, mix 3 and 4, 5 and 6, 7 and 8. And then the point is, I even take headphone mixes from here and send it to Dante. And on my Grace, I get to switch what I'm listening to. Let me listen to mixer number 1. Let me listen to mixer number 2. Let me listen to my main DAW mix. Let me listen to mix C, which sometimes I would play a separate track through mix C, and then I can A-B mixes or something like that. Which it comes really handy, and I find myself using all 16 channels pretty much at all time, which is amazing because I still got more channels as well. I'm also using the Dante in here. I'm recently gotten the Grace 108, which is a single unit 8 channel preamp, but it has a Dante output. So what I'm using now is I'm having it connected to my Dante, and then I'm receiving this as in my Dante inputs on my Galaxy as 8 channel pre's. That's on top of all the rest of the analog pre's that I have, which is very practical for me. Next is Maddie, which carries 64 channels of audio via Maddie cable. So I used to use Maddie in the studio because that's how I had an RME unit that uses Maddie, converts it to ADAT, and then I would feed my Behringer P16. But now because that unit has more analog IOs, and I would rather use the converters in this unit than the Behringer, I'm not really using the Maddie at this point, but probably sometime in the future I will be. Then the next is HDX. They doubled the IO on the HDX. Instead of having 2 HDX ports like the Galaxy 32, now they have 4 HDX ports, which gives you 128 channels of HDX. Which this is like a game changer if you're using Pro Tools HD or you're using HDX cards and you want to have a lot more IOs. That's absolutely incredible. Then they also added AES, which that was not in the Galaxy 32. And I love that because it's a dedicated digital input and output that you can feed it to any digital unit in your studio. Like for example, in my case, which would be the TC Electronic meter, or if you have any other meters in your studio that you want to feed. So that would come from this. And then they still have their clocking, and they added more BNCs. There's so many BNCs on the back of that unit. You can loop and clock so many devices, which is absolutely incredible and very versatile and flexible. Now that unit still is compatible with the MRC, and it still have full Dolby Atmos integration. You still have the surround setup in here with up to 16 speakers, with dedicated EQ on all of these. similar to what the Galaxy 32 have, and it would fully integrate with the MRC, which is phenomenal. Another thing that I noticed, which I'm doing a separate video on the control panel, is the virtual mixes. They doubled the virtual mixes on this unit versus having 4 stereo mixes. Now you have 8 stereo mixes, which I really like that. They also have a lot more DSP than the unit before. You can have even more plugins. I don't think you'll ever run out of DSP plugin processing for real-time monitoring with zero latency on that unit. I get if you want more IOs, you would have one interface, and then I would add like an ADAT and a second interface, and you daisy chain so many things to get enough IOs, which what my studio setup used to be like. But honestly, consolidating everything into one unit, and I have one control panel, controls all of my ins and outs in my studio, both analog and digital, has become a game changer in my studio. Part of the upgrade going to the Galaxy was not only to add more IOs to my setup, but it was also simplifying my setup. I found myself that I got to a point where my setup became too complex, and I had too many channels going in too many places, and in the heat of a moment while I'm in the middle of a session and something has gone wrong, in my head I have to process so many different scenarios of where could it be. Versus if everything's centrally located into one device, then it's a lot easier and simpler to set up in the entire studio. And that's one of the advantages of going with something like this that had so many IOs in it. Now, when you connect that unit to your computer via Thunderbolt, it will read the same idea as the 32 Galaxy, which has 64 channels of inputs and outputs on your DAW, on your software. But these are the 64 channels input and output that you're recording. Now, the unit has hundreds and hundreds of audio because you got 64 input of analog, you got 64 Maddie, you got 64 ADAT, you got 128 HDX. I mean, there's so many channels, but you choose 64 to be recorded simultaneously inside your DAW. Or inside your computer. And the same way for playback, you're playing back out 64 channels. One thing to mention about this unit, they did take away the ADAT. Like the Galaxy 32 had one ADAT, so they took that away. I know they added the AES, which wasn't there before, but they took away the ADAT, which I don't know the purpose behind that. It's cool to have ADAT, but honestly, with the newer technology, I feel like Maddie and Dante and HDX were just taking over because ADAT had a lot of restrictions, and then that cable could only carry 8 channels of audio, while protocols of at 48 sample rate. While Maddie now at 48 sample rate, one cable is carrying 64 channels of audio, so you get a lot more versatility. So I kind of see why they removed the ADAT. I would have preferred if the ADAT stayed there, but anyways, I'm just giving a full specs and details of what's there and what's not there for that unit. Okay, let's talk about dynamic range. So for this unit, you have dedicated monitor outputs to feed a set of speakers, and these are running at 130 dB of dynamic range, which is absolutely incredible. And then you have 64 channels of I/O that is digital to analog and analog to digital. And then they both have separate dynamic range. When you run digital to analog, you are running 128 dB of dynamic range, and when you're running analog to digital, you're running 121 dynamic range. Which at the end of the day, it's plenty of dynamic range for you to work with. Like to give you an example, obviously in tracking, this is not a problem at all. Like you're not even close to that dynamic range. Dynamic range matters more when you're running a full mix through mix bus processing, or when you're mastering and then you need that extra headroom because you're trying to push your mix through like an SSL unit or something that has a higher headroom or something like that. But I've worked with now like both mixing and mastering at really high level, pushing the converter so high, and I still got plenty of dynamic range. It was really impressive being able to push my gear to a further limit. I'm talking like my analog processing gear, not the Galaxy. Because I have higher dynamic range on the converters, I'm able to push my hardware units more. And sometimes you get different color when you push those units closer to the edge. With my previous interfaces, not the Antelope interface, I wasn't able to do that because if I push it too hard and it comes closer to the end of the dynamic range of the interface, I was starting to get too much harmonic distortion and then I would hear the converters, they wouldn't sound that great. But because of having the higher dynamic range here, there is absolutely no problem. Now, the other thing about the Galaxy, which is both the 64 and the 32, their control panel, which we'll have a separate video on this, but that control panel is absolutely, I mean, you could do so much. It become a full digital patch bay where I'm grabbing an audio from here, sending it to here, sending it to here, and sending it to multiple places, sending it to effects for plugins for processing, and sending it to headphone mixes, and then sending it to my Dante and receiving an audio from Dante, sending it back to Maddie. I mean, you could grab anything from anywhere, put it into anywhere. That includes converting analog to digital and digital to analog, and in all different directions. It's kind of amazing how much flexibility. It looks a little intimidating, but once you understand the control panel, it makes sense because there's so much flexible routing in that unit that it covers all studio scenarios. It covers me if my studio was this setup or my studio became 10 times more complex than what I have right now. I can still route anything anywhere using that unit and I'm set. And that's kind of what I was going for, trying to find a unit that serves all my current purposes as well as potential future growth, without having to worry about like this interface is, I'm going to outgrow that interface really quick. I mean, this is kind of pretty much as good as it gets at this point. So anyways, I think this is a quick recap of just what the interface is, how I'm using it into my setup right now, integrating that into my setup. When I make the other video about my control panel, I will go through more where my IOs and what they look like and stuff like that. Also explaining all the features for that interface, a little bit of the differences between this one and the 32. And if you're considering buying any of these, whether that or the 32, make sure to use, I have a code in my comments below in the description, and that would give you 10% from Antelope's website. Also, if you have any questions about the interface or routing or something like that, shoot me an email or put in the comments below, and I'm happy to schedule a session as I do a lot of consulting with studios and helping them with their setup. I hope this video was helpful. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys at the next video.